Okay. To actually see where your cursor is when you're sharing another screen. But anyway, welcome everybody to New Patient School. We're really excited to have you. And as always, we want to do a huge, big welcome to our new users. We had a lot of new users come on in the last 2 weeks. To the tune of around 20 or so, 25, something like that. So I know we've got people. Friday is not always the best day, but if you're watching this maybe on replay, I want to give you a team heartfelt welcome to Patient Stream. We love having you. Thank you so much for coming and being part of what we've got going on here. So welcome to our new users as well as visitors. You know, Patient Stream and what we're doing here in this new patient, our new patient school rather, with myself and Dr. Wells is something we love doing. It's something we want to share with a lot of people. So if you're a visitor here, we want to welcome you. And then of course, our seasoned pros. I see a lot of people on the call right now who their names that I very much recognize. So welcome to all of you guys, and thanks for coming, you seasoned professionals. Just to, again, let you guys know what we're here and why we are doing this particular and specific training. Our goal, we have one goal, okay? Our goal is to help docs grow their practices by providing a software that allows you to run niche-specific marketing campaigns, to provide training on the most effective methods to increase new patient conversions, and a community of docs. I mean, when I mean a community, we've got like people, what Dr. Wells is doing here, he's not getting paid for this. And him, as well as other people that have provided content and feedback and that are willing to share what they're doing, that if that's not a testament of the drive and passion that they have and we all have, then I don't know what is. And we're all here to do one thing. We want to have one primary focus, and that is getting more new patients. Okay, there's a lot of things that you can do in your practice. And, you know, I started out in the practice consulting arena, so I understand all of those things, but I don't want to be the jack of all trades. I want to be the master of new patients, and that's what Patient Stream is here to do, and that's why you guys are here. That's what, you know, that's what we're all about. And again, we want to make it so easy that even this stupid dodo bird, that he can do it. Okay. That doesn't mean that if you're struggling with anything that you're dumb. That's not what it means. The point is we're trying to distill and provide enough good, actionable content that you can make vast and dramatic improvements in your practice. Okay, let's get on to today. What is today all about? So today's training is part one. So, and we might be into 3 parts. I just don't know. And I don't know that Dr. Wells knows either. I think we're going to play this thing a little bit by ear today. But it's part one of a very big topic, and that is what is considered day 2. So how to enroll new patients like a machine. So if, you know, when I started consulting docs, we did a 4-day report of findings. So it was actually 4 days, but I think by and large, most people now do a 2-day. So a day 1 and a day 2, and day 2 is when we go through the enrollment and actually getting people to sign up for your services. So that is what we're going to be focusing on here today. And to do that with me is my buddy, Dr. Andrew Wells. If it's your first time and you don't not know Dr. Wells, first of all, you're in for a real treat. He is the owner of a company called Simplified Integration. Okay. He has a podcast, and he's got what I love about Dr. Wells is he's a really good teacher. I love his stories. In fact, the story, if you guys were here maybe 2 weeks ago, the story about money in the road, I can't forget that one. It's there. And I've had people reach out to me and talk about that one story. Oh, there's money in the road. If you don't know what it is, I can send you the training. But he's got a great podcast. And first and foremost, the thing that we have in common is husband, father. And, you know, I know for him, that is a huge part of his life, as it is mine. So in that way, we are, you know, brothers from other mothers. And that's why I'm glad to have him here. So with that, Dr. Wells, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you want me to use my slides, or should we see if you can do yours today?
Yeah, if we can use yours today, I think that would be great.
All right, let's do it. I'll turn the time over to you, my friend.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate it, Sam. And thanks for the introduction. And yeah, I'm really excited to be on here, and I'm really excited to see all the people, the guests on the training today. Day 2 is a big deal. And this is something I've worked on and have gotten better at over the years. And it didn't come easy at first. And I remember, and this, Sam, as you're talking about stories, this literally just popped in my head. I was trying to think of when my day 2 training actually started. And it actually started in chiropractic school at Palmer. I hope we've got some Palmer grads on here. And I don't know if it was the same for you guys when you were in school. We had report of findings training in chiropractic school. And this is literally how it went. They said, we're going to give you a sample patient and you're going to do a report of findings. And we're going to record it on a video. So we partnered up with another student. And I said, well, what do you want us to, like, how do you want us to do the report of findings? And they said, well, just do it the way you think you would do it. And I'm like, well, I've never done one. So how do you do it? And they're like, well, just do it and we'll tell you how you did. I'm like,
so helpful.
I'm not making this up. I had no freaking clue. I'd never seen a report of findings. I'd never heard a report of findings. I barely knew what a report of findings was. And there was zero context for what we were supposed to do. So I asked a bunch of friends, I'm like, hey, do you have like an example of a report of findings? And then finally I dug up some information on how to do one. But, one of the things that I think number one, doesn't come naturally, but also isn't really taught is how to do a good report of findings. And that's what we're going to go in today. And, there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about. There's like psychological stuff we can talk about. There's tactical stuff we can talk about. There's day 1 stuff, a lot of day 1 stuff we can talk about. And, I really, when I came out of chiropractic school, I spent a year working for a doctor for free just to learn this stuff I'm about to teach you. And it's incredibly valuable. So when I actually started our first practice and had this like day 1 and day 2 process, in fact, kind of like you, Sam, we, instead of having a day 4 process, we had a 3-day process. So our day 2 actually happened on the 3rd day. But I had spent a lot of time practicing all the things that happen on a day 2 and a day 1. And that's what we're going to go over today. So I'm really excited about this. I get geeked out about day 2. I love being in the day 2 process. And let's kick it off. So just to give you a general flow, like this is what we typically do on a day 2. And this is some of the stuff we'll go over today. If we have time, we'll go over all of it. But so number 1, you greet the patient. The second step is you have some sort of patient education process, which we'll talk about definitely today. And then you have the actual report of findings, or reviewing the findings, which is basically a problem discovery solution format, which we'll dive into. At that point, you've presented your facts, and then you give your recommendations as a doctor. So here's how we're going to correct your problem. And then you have the close, which is asking the patient to commit to care, where you go over their insurance information, their financial information, they sign up for care. And then there is a follow-up process. So we want to make sure that once the patient has bought and they're signed on, that they don't have any buyer's remorse. So we're just closing that loop. So the 3 big topics we're going to cover today as we dive into that framework is number 1, and this is really important, and this is how to identify and fix bottlenecks or problems in your entire new patient process. And we're actually going to talk a lot about this specific one today. We'll go over the top 3 reasons a patient doesn't commit to care. So these are the ones that would fit like 80% of your patients that aren't signing up for care. And then we'll also talk about how to structure your report of findings, like a successful recipe or steps that you can use. This is the blueprint or the outline that you can use to actually structure and format your report of findings. So that number 3, this was the thing that I didn't have coming out of chiropractic school that I really wish someone had showed me, because it really made a whole lot of sense. So once someone gave me the blueprint, I'm like, that makes total sense. And I could kind of reverse engineer it from there. All right, so here's where the patient should be at this point. So if you're just jumping on this training for the first time today, again, welcome. So last training we talked about, which was before Thanksgiving, we talked about how to do a systemized day 1. So how to do a consultation, how to do an exam. If you missed that part, go back to it. The patient at this point should have some hope and also some sense that you can help them with their particular issue. And then finally, they should be looking forward to the report of findings. And so they should have some hope. They should come in your office for day 2. Like, they should be excited to be there. And we'll talk about what happens if they're not excited to be there. So looking at your day 2 process, and I really want you to be honest with yourself and be honest with your practice here. is this what you're getting on day 2? So number 1, is the patient showing up and they show up to your front desk for day 2 and they just have a ton of questions like, hey, I don't know if I can afford this. What's my insurance cover? What's the doctor going to do to me today? They get really they have a ton of questions and they're nervous or they have anxiety or they're all scattered. Do you have that problem? Does the patient seem skeptical? Do you get the sense that they're walking in or their spouse comes with them and they feel like they're about to sit through like a timeshare sales process or they're about to be sold on something? Third thing is maybe they don't show up. So obviously that is a day 2 problem. The next bullet point is maybe they rescheduled. So we have patients that, we scheduled for the report of findings and they always seem to, the day of the report of findings, they keep kicking the can down the road and rescheduling. Maybe they seem like at day 2 that they're sort of like, they don't want to be there or they're distracted or maybe they're on their phone the whole time and not really listening to what you're saying. That's a problem on day 2. And then, of course, if they don't commit to care, that's the obvious problem if you have a low percentage rate. So to give you an idea of a successful close rate, you should be closing at least 80% of the patients who are coming back for day 2. So we talked about these stats on a previous training, but if patients are showing up on day 2 and you're closing 60, 50, 40%, there's a problem there.
Yeah. So I'm kind of interested. We've got folks here and I normally give an outline of how to use the virtual setting here, but there's a chat feature at the bottom. You can open a chat window and let us know A, that you're here, and B, I'm wondering how many of you which one of these seems to occur common, if any of them. Which one have you seen? Give us some feedback in that chat if you wouldn't mind. I'll go ahead and get you back on your way here, Dr. Wells. But I wanted to get people engaging and affirming. Man, these are real things. I can't tell you how many times as the guy. I mean, my job is to provide a full pipeline, right? And nothing is more frustrating than seeing people run into these problems and just it's the same way. Like there's symptoms. These are symptoms. And if you just look at a symptom, you say, oh man, the symptom is the problem. No. There's an underlying source of that problem. And anyway, so let us know in the chat which one of these, if any of them. I guess that would be people admitting, shortcoming, and I don't want to necessarily do that, but just say here, or something along those lines. Go ahead, Dr. Wells.
Yeah, and Sam, you're totally right, man. I've had issues with all of those problems. The reason those problems are listed on here is because number 1, I've had problems with those over the years, and also I see with our clients they're having they have the same issues, and that's normal. It's when you're dealing with people, those are normal day 2 problems. And so this is really where the best thing you can do for yourself in your practice, just be honest with yourself, right? And one of the best sort of the best litmus tests for whether things are going right in your office or not is your staff. Like I always gave my staff permission that if they ever heard something like wacky coming out of my mouth or something super awkward, I tend to be an awkward person. They had full authority to say, hey, Dr. Wells, you probably shouldn't say that again because you're causing problems. Like the patient didn't want to hear that. I'm like, okay, so give your staff authority to say, hey, you need to fix something. So here are, and also to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, all of those problems, and we'll talk about this, all of those problems are symptoms of a bad day 1 process. And we'll break that down. If you're not getting commits on day 2, it's almost never a day 2 problem. It's almost always a day 1 problem. Yeah. Patients know when they're coming back for day 2, they already know if they want to be a patient of yours or not. They just want to know what you're going to do to them and how much it's going to cost. That's it. And if you can handle those 2 problems and get out of the way of the patient committing to care, you're going to be okay. But if you don't set it up, if you don't tee the patient up to have a good day 2 experience on day 1, then it's not going to work.
If you're taking notes, I loved what you said. On day 1, at the end of day 1, they already know if they want to be a patient. I love that. I've never actually heard anybody say that, but man, that's true. I just know that's true. That's amazing.
It is so true. And all those symptoms I just mentioned, if they're coming back on day 2 and you're having those symptoms, it's because something is wrong in day 1. And we're going to dive into that in a minute. But I promise you, I've seen this over and over again. if your day one is solid, your day two will go really well. But oftentimes as doctors, we always think, well, day two is the day they're signing up. So day two is the most important.
Yeah.
It really isn't. Day one is the most important.
Right.
So here are the top three reasons patients don't commit to care on day two. So number one reason is they don't bring their, that's great, right?
I should have waited to animate that slide. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself.
No, it's so good. So I learned this lesson really early on. And this is, a lot of doctors have anxiety and fear and trepidation and awkwardness around this point. It's like, well, they feel like it's tough to ask the patient to bring their spouse to the report of findings, because when they get some kind of objection, like, well, why does my spouse need to be there? And, hey, I make decisions by myself. I'm a big boy. I'm a big girl. Like, I don't need my spouse to be there. And docs feel really awkward sometimes about answering that question. And so what we would, almost every time when we had a patient show up without their spouse there, the number one reason they're like, they didn't commit to care that day was, well, I need to go home and talk to my spouse. And I always felt like Michael Scott here just getting punched in the gut. I'm like, dang it. Like I should have pressed harder. Yeah, thanks, Sam. I should have pressed harder on day one to get the patient back, because this is like, it's the number one reason. That was, and it always was and always has been the number one reason for a patient not starting care. So the problem with this is, if you believe your patient when they say, I'm going to go home and talk to my spouse and I'll come back, I'll call you back and let you know. If you really think that happens on a regular basis and the patient starts care, I've got a lot of statistics that will show you otherwise. And the reality is, the patient goes home, they're sitting around dinner, hey, how did your appointment go today? Good. I got to talk to you about something. What? I need $4,000. Like, for what? Like, well, I need to start care here. Well, doesn't our insurance cover it? No, what they do isn't covered by insurance. Well, it must not be good therapy then. Let's go find somewhere where our insurance pays for what you need. Let's go get a second opinion. And they never come back. Occasionally we'd have somebody come back, but that's the number one issue. So that is a day one problem. And I'll talk about that in two more slides, how to fix that. So the number two reason a patient doesn't commit to care is because you schedule the report of findings out too far. There is no urgency. So if you're not, just like for day one, if you're not getting a patient in the first 48 to 72 hours, and really 48 is important. If you schedule your report of findings out a week or 2 weeks out or 10 days out, the statistics plummet in the patient actually showing up. And so this is an urgency issue. And I'm sure you get this on day one, like, hey, we need to see you back right away. Oh, work's really busy, or I'm going out of town. I can come back in a couple of weeks. You really need to get the patient as soon as possible. And actually, Sam, if you'll skip to the next slide, here's the real reason, guys. And this is also the number three reason, is that you didn't uncover their true motivating factor on day one. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a patient that says they come in your office and they have back pain. And in your consultation, you're asking them, well, what was your main reason for coming in today? And the patient says, well, I just need help with my back pain. And you ask, well, why do you want help with your back pain? Like, well, it hurts. I just want the pain to go away. Okay. So the question I always have for patients in that scenario is, well, why don't you just take some Tylenol or take some Advil? Or, if you just want the pain to go away, why not just, go to a pain clinic and they can cover up your pain. And I don't say that in a bad way or in a negative way. That's obviously an option that they have. But most times when patients are coming in, and most of the people I think on this list are either chiropractic offices or integrated offices. I think last time we had an orthopedic office on the call. But they're showing up to your office because oftentimes they've been down that road before, or they don't want to take medication for the rest of their life, or they want some sort of like natural alternative to conventional healthcare. But they're coming in, they're saying, hey, I just want my pain to go away. And that's important, but if you're not diving down to figure out why they want their pain to go away, then you're missing the boat. And so what we'll do in the consultation, and this is really key on day one, the consultation, in my opinion, is everything. If you're not figuring out like why they really want help, and this could be because maybe they're missing a bunch of work and they're afraid of getting fired, or maybe their pain is causing relationship issues. We had a patient, I remember vividly, he's like, I was kind of digging down on this subject, and he's like, I'm like, well, why do you want your pain to go away? He goes, this is embarrassing. He goes, I can't have sex anymore. And I'm like, boom, like that. Okay, that's a motivating factor. We had a guy recently, he's a referee for basketball, and he's a relatively young guy. And he says, after I'm reffing a basketball game, my knees hurt so bad, it takes me 3 days before I can even feel somewhat normal again. And he said, if I can't referee basketball and be active, he's like, I'm going to be a miserable dude. He goes, I need to get my knees fixed. I really don't want to have surgery. I'm too young. That was the motivating factor. So he just gave it to us. It was really easy. But if you're getting these really superficial answers like, hey, I just want the pain to go away, or, I'm tired of dealing with pain, like dig down a little bit deeper and find out why they're really there. Because if you don't uncover that, it's really tough to get them to come back with some urgency. So that was the second issue, right? It's also really tough to get them back with their spouse, because if it's just about pain, well, of course they don't need their spouse to be there, right? It's not a big deal. They just have some pain. They want it to go away. But if it's affecting their life, it's affecting their career, if it's affecting their quality of life, then it's it's much easier then to explain why you should have their spouse there for the report of findings. It completely smooths out that situation. So that way, when a patient says, well, why does my wife need to be there on day 2? It's like, listen, dude, this is affecting your sex life. This is affecting your relationships at home. Like, it's really important that your spouse is here so they know what's wrong and what it's going to take to correct the issue.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, having a spouse there, I mean, it's almost like we're saying, hey, listen, this is a moment in time where we're saying that we want to change. Okay. And when you're married, that change is a joint decision. And so we want to make sure that we educate and we provide the full picture of what the solution looks like before you commit to care. Right. And I think, as a practical reason, obviously just having, if my wife, and I've been married for 18 years, if my wife comes to me and says something kind of flippant, like, I don't know, I want this amount of money, I'm going to go do that, whatever it is, I'm always defensive about it. And I don't know why. It's just kind of how we're wired. It's like, because I have no context. I don't understand the full measure of the story. And so involving me in the story and saying, hey, I actually am going to an appointment tomorrow. It's really important that you be there because they're going to do some recommendations and I really just need your feedback. Would you mind coming to the appointment with me? Something along those lines. It just sets people up. When people care, then they can help, but they need some context to care, right? They need some reason to care. We don't just automatically say, oh, okay, well, like you said, here's $4,000. It's not generally how people work. So next slide.
Yeah, please. Yeah. And what's interesting is that oftentimes we'll have a spouse show up and they're not quite sure often like why they have to be there, but they just kind of show up. More times than not, the spouse is a bigger advocate for the patient starting care than the patient themselves.
Yeah.
And I know this to be true as a parent, as a husband. I will make sure that my wife and my kids are taken care of way before I'm taken care of. So I come last, and most people are like that. And so oftentimes I can live with the pain, or I can live with this issue a little bit longer. It's, I care more about my family than me. It's that sort of relationship. And when you have the spouse with them, they're oftentimes the biggest advocate for the patient.
Yeah.
So, all right. So this next slide, so you can, if you hit spacebar, thank you. So here's what you need to do. So this is really about identifying that you have a problem and how to fix it. So if you're getting the same sort of objections over and over and over again, if it's a money objection, or if it's a time objection, or if it's a spouse objection, make a note of that, because that's, again, a symptom of something that's happening in a previous part of the process, typically in day 1. And so you need to figure out what part of day 1 isn't clicking that you're getting these objections. And then you need to train on it. So if you have lots of issues, don't try to fix it all at once. Just pick one thing. And so over the next 2 weeks, I want you to, and this is homework for you, is find out what your biggest bottleneck is, or what the biggest objection is. write it down, and then figure out a plan to correct that problem. And so you need to, and I can almost guarantee you it's something in the day one process. It's either your consultation, it's your exam, or it's how you're actually closing the day one exam. That's typically the big, the big traps for most docs. And then so repeat and control. So once you've fixed that problem, so if you've identified the problem correctly and you're training to fix the problem correctly, then you should notice on day two, you're having less of those objections and less of those problems. And that's when you know it's time to start working on another issue. Yeah. And Doc, here's where I always, I stress this so much. The way that you figure this out is not on a gut feeling. So most docs try to I think this is the problem here. And sometimes docs are right, sometimes they're wrong. You'll see this in your stats. So if you're not measuring your statistics and we went over, and I think on the first call, Sam, first training, we went over some key statistics.
Yeah, we did.
And so just looking at your statistics, and this is one of the things that we do for our clients, is we just look at your weekly and monthly stats. And I can tell you, looking at your stats, what part of your day one or day two process is off and what you need to work on correcting to increase your statistics. So if you don't have basic statistics in place, put those in place now. Go back to the original training on that. And it's just looking at how many, based on your leads, how many of your leads are actually showing up, making appointments, how many of those appointments are actually showing up. If the appointments show up, how many people schedule for a day two, how many people close on day two. Those are really simple statistics that you can put in place.
Yeah. So cool. Can I interject here real quick?
Yep.
I remember so this process is really important. And I remember it being illustrated to me one time with Sonny, who you know, Sonny. Yeah. And he had reached out to me, this is 3 years ago, and he said, hey, I want to do a cosmetic acupuncture campaign. This is something that, we heard, I don't know how it came about, but he said, can you market for it? So sure, I can create an offer for that and get people. And we started doing that, and we had great success getting leads. And so based on lead volume, I'm like, man, this guy's got to be crushing it. So I reached out to him, and I was saying, hey, how are things going with that new campaign? He said, we're doing really good up to this point, and from here going forward, we haven't figured out, he called it the close, right? And basically what he was doing, every single niche, every single service that he provided in his clinic had a different educational process. Okay. And it, for some people, with brand new things, to demonstrate it and to educate people on how it actually worked and why it would work for them, that's different for every single person. And so what was really telling to me was he didn't look at, he didn't say, oh, well, this lead quality is bad. That was not even part of his thought process. He said, hey, we're good here. We're good here. He identified his process as a pipeline, and a pipeline that had different clogging or bottlenecks, right? And what was so cool about that was to watch him unclog those bottlenecks and turn it into a thing that that became a reproducible service center in his practice. And so, this is not just something flippant that Dr. Wells is saying. I have seen this myself. And if you really take time to look at whatever niche you have, and you're going after that niche, if it's not hitting those stats and those KPIs that you want it to hit, go through the process, refine it, and fix it before you jump to the next condition. Because that same problem, if you go from, say, neuropathy to knee pain, whatever, it's not necessarily that you're having problems with that niche. So you haven't figured out the process. And once you figure out one process, it becomes really easy to start doing that process over and over again. In fact, we've got Michelle Sims is on the call today, and she and I are doing an interview next week about how she's done that with different niches. Like, she treats knee different than she does neuropathy. And it's taking the time to think about it. what steps work for what demographics, and then writing it down, and then boom, you have a system in your office. And that system is what's going to unlock so many possibilities for your future growth. So that's all I got, buddy.
Yeah, no, that's so true, man. I know we've been in almost every niche, and it's the same. It is the same business structure for chiropractic, for neuropathy, for regenerative medicine, for integrated offices. It's the exact same. And by the way, if you get concerned about or overwhelmed with the thought of having to track statistics, have your staff do it. It takes 5 minutes for your staff to compile the stats. Give them a little template. We give all of our clients spreadsheets. It takes 5 minutes a week to fill it out. You look at the stats, and we can tell you within 2 minutes what's going right and what's going wrong. And so you're right. Instead of jumping from niche to niche or therapy to therapy, expecting like, okay, this is going to be the golden ticket for my office. It's not. The golden ticket is just making sure that you're developing and training a good team and looking at your stats. Yep. So let's actually apply this now to like your report of findings. And by the way, I meant to mention this earlier in the training. Here's how you look at a day 1, day 2 process. The day 1 process is you're looking for facts. You're just gathering information, gathering facts. So that's what day 1 is. Day 2 is just presenting what you found on day 1. So you're presenting the stats. So sometimes when doctors get really nervous about, okay, this is the sales process. It is, but there's really not a whole lot of selling that you have to do. Like when I talk about, what I mean when I say selling is that selling starts when people start to tell you no. And in most cases, you shouldn't be getting a whole lot of no's in your office. So there's really not a lot of selling you have to do. It's just presenting the information you found on day 1. All right, so let's talk about the education process. I assumed that most doctors had an education process in place, and what I found just in having worked with and spoken with hundreds and hundreds of doctors is that some doctors don't have this in their practice, and it's a mistake. And there's a lot of ways to educate patients. And I can't say that one way is better than the other. And actually, Sam, if you want to hit the next one too, the top 2 bullet points here. The best ways, in my opinion, to educate patients, number 1 are group lectures, and number 2, doing some sort of like canned education video, like what we call a report of findings video. Now, let me talk about the first one for a minute. When we were running our just cash-based chiropractic office, brand new into practice, I was terrified of doing group lectures. It felt awkward to me. I don't naturally I'm not comfortable speaking in front of groups. And it just caused me a lot of panic and anxiety. But the reason I did it is because it worked. And so we would do twice a week, we would do group report of findings for our chiropractic patients. And every single time in the evening when I'd do them, I'd get all worked up. I'd get all nervous. I would actually stand in the bathroom 5 minutes before I was supposed to come out and do my report of findings. I would do jumping jacks. I would do prayer. I'd pray. I would look in the mirror. I'm like, all right, this is going to go great. I had a lot of anxiety around it. And so I'd have to really pump myself up to do a report of findings. And they always went really well. And I had a high conversion rate, but it took a ton of energy for me to do those. And I did those consistently for years. And the end result was we had incredibly well educated patients. They knew exactly what to expect. We taught them how to read their x-rays. So rarely did I ever tell a patient what was good and bad on their x-rays. They were so well educated that they could tell me what was good and bad for the most part. And they sort of, once they're educated, they kind of closed themselves. And then after a while, after we integrated our offices, I just didn't have time to do these group lectures anymore, even though I really, our patients got a lot out of them. So we just took the same process that we were doing in group lectures, and we created a report of findings video. So instead of being an hour-long talk or 45-minute long talk, we condensed it down to about 15 to 20 minutes of the really important information. So when patients came back on day 2, we'd greet the patient, and the first thing they would do is sit down and watch this 15-minute video. And it did 2 things, 3 things actually. Number 1, it automated that process, so I didn't have to keep doing, saying the same things over and over again. It reminded the patient what we talked about on day 1, and it also brought their spouse up to speed. So what we're doing is we're just telling the patient what we want them to know. And so this really sets the patient up for, by the time you make recommendations, whether it's adjustments or regenerative medicine or neuropathy protocol or weight loss protocol, the patient should already know what the features, advantages, and benefits are of what you're recommending. It's all in the education video. So if you're not educating your patient, and let me give you a scenario. So a patient walks in your office and they have back pain. You take x-rays of the patient on day one, and then right away you pull up the x-rays on day one and say, Sam, here you go. This is your problem right here. You have no space at L4 and L5. You see that right there? The patient's like, yeah. All right. So we're going to need you to come back and we're going to adjust you 3 times a week. And I really think we can help you with this problem. And what happens is the patient, again, has no context. They don't know all right, does this, like, how bad is the spine? Is it on a scale of 1 to 10? Is it like a 1 or is it a 10? How long will it take to correct? What are your results for correcting this? But they have all these questions because they weren't pre-educated. And so sometimes we assume that a patient should know what a healthy spine looks like, or they know what degeneration looks like, or they know what a loss of space in their knee joint looks like, and they don't. And so if you're not educating your patients beforehand, there is zero context for what you're going to tell them and recommend in your actual recommendations. So if you don't currently have some sort of education process, whether that's group lectures, a video, by all means put that in place. And if you don't have that, if you have doctors or friends that are doctors, borrow their report of findings process, but just put one in place. One of the things Sam and I were talking about earlier was that some doctors have gotten to a point where they've integrated their education process in the day 2 report of findings itself. And that, I'll just say that, like, that takes a really, really high level of communication and confidence to pull that off. And I know a handful of doctors that can do that without like a formal video education process or group lecture process. But I'll tell you, it's really difficult to do. And there's not many docs who can do that at a really high level and actually close patients at 80% or higher. So if you're one of those docs that's kind of like winging it and trying to educate your patients as you're doing recommendations and the reported findings, it's pretty tough to do that. Not to say you can't do it, but unless you're like just a black belt communicator and you really know how to ask the patient good questions and get confirmation, it's pretty tough. So the last 2 things I'm going to talk about on this slide is please make sure that you're communicating with patients on their level. If you start using terminology and words that you would learn in chiropractic school or medical school, if you're using big words like osteoarthritis and severe subluxation, like these technical terms, you're going to lose your patients. So you should always be speaking to your patient at like a 3rd to 6th grade level of communication. So for example, if you say that you have loss of joint space at L4, even though that totally will make sense to any chiropractor, most people don't really know what that means. So instead, what you can say is, see the bones here between this bone and the space in between this bone and that bone, that's smaller than it should be. So instead of saying like you have osteoarthritis and loss of joint space, just say, hey, the space here between the bones is a lot less than what it should be. So if you're, you just want to bring your level of communication knowledge, your vocabulary down to, a really simple level so that patients can understand what you're trying to communicate. And then finally, and this is a key thing here, and so this is the first thing that Sam actually talked about in this training, is use stories. So when I was doing our group chiropractic lectures, I would talk for 2 minutes about technical stuff. So I would say, here's what a spine should look like, straight from the front, curvy from the side, spaces in between, here's where the nerves come out. From that point on, all I talked about were stories. So what I would do is I'd put up a picture of somebody who had headaches, and I would give them the backstory. So this lady came in with headaches. She had migraines for 5 years. She's on a ton of medication, been to all these doctors. Here's what happened when she came in. We took an x-ray. Here's what her spine should look like. Here's what her spine looked like when it came in. Do you guys see the difference between these two? The patients are always like, yeah, there's no curve, or the atlas is off. And then we'd say, okay, so we identified the problem, and here's how we fixed the problem. So here's what we did. We had her come in 3 times a week and did these exercises. Let me show you her post x-ray. So this is 3 months later. Do you see any difference? Yeah, we see a difference. Okay, at this point, most of her headaches were gone. Same thing. So we would tell like details about her story, like how it affected her life, and why she didn't want to be on medications, what her side effects were, and then we fixed the problem, and now here's what life is like for her now. Now she comes in and gets adjusted once a month. Why does she do that? She never wants to go back to where she was before. So we're just telling stories. Do the same thing for scoliosis patients. We do that for back pain patients. We do that for sciatic patients. So we're educating and communicating using stories. And the reason we do that is people can relate to stories. It makes the information real. If you start talking about, if you're educating in a very technical way, maybe 10% of your patients will be able to follow you and learn from what you're trying to teach. But if you're not using stories, then you're just missing opportunities to connect with patients in a real way and really get them to understand what you want them to know. So if you're not familiar using, or not comfortable or not using stories in your education process, take some time and think about some of your successful patients in the past, and maybe pick out a handful. Like I used the same stories over and over and over again. I had like 10 patients that I could pull from. So if they had a headache or they had knee pain or neuropathy, I could say, all right, I need to tell Bob's story or Mary's story. And man, when you do that, patients really they start to get a sense for why you do what you do. And there's also, by the way, there's an emotional connection when you do that. When you're telling your stories, I'm a very bland speaker. I'm a very monotone speaker. When I start talking about something I'm really passionate about, especially helping people, like holy cow, they get excited about it because I'm excited about it, and then they get excited about it, and it's just it's a much more powerful way to motivate people and to bring them into where you are. Sam, you are an expert on this subject as well. I don't know if I butchered that topic or I'm rambling or not, but
I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. It's so important because, I have my best friend lives in Colorado, and we've been best friends since we were 6 years old. And so he knew me. We actually got married around the same time. We've got a long track record, and it's really funny. You know how you'll get into not arguments, but maybe differences of opinion between you and your spouse. It's like, trust me, this is, and you just expect that because you're the spouse that they should think the way you do. And what's funny is if I ever have like a point of view that I feel strongly about, I'll just go to my friend. I'll be like, hey man, if he agrees with me, I'll literally have my wife talk to him. And you want to know why? He is a genius at pulling relatable examples, i.e. stories, and pulling those in really quick and just relating them to her. And she's like, oh yeah. I'm like, I already said that, but you didn't say it in that way, And so you have to understand that your audience, they're coming from the world, and the world has points of view that creates a fixed idea and a visual in their head. So to combat that, you have to use DNA. What do I mean by DNA? Well, our ancestors used stories to convey and pass down information. It is in our DNA. A good story will bypass any level of logic. And now this is, don't use this for evil, but a good story will bypass any level of logic and replace it with new information. It's a conduit for converting people to a new way of thinking. In fact, if you do any, there's this guy that has a book called Story Brand, right? And any level of marketing or attention getting, it always has stories. The very best people. In fact, I started this little rant with a story. I'm telling you right now, if you learn how to use stories, and they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes and lengths. Some stories are long, like a case study, like Dr. Wells was talking about. Other ones can be short. Did you know that in the United States, we probably, I don't know what the actual statistic is, but I'm guessing we crush the rest of the world when it comes to cutting open patients than anywhere else. Why is that? So that in and of itself is a type of story. So learning to use those to educate a person is the easiest way to get them to say, hey, yeah, I like this. I like this new way of thinking. This is for me. This is a new way to solve a problem that society has said, oh, you can't really fix low back pain without surgery. Can't do it. Well, hogwash. Here's a story. Here's an example. Here's a study. here, so no, I think you hit it on it beautifully. And I think if you want to have an awesome report of findings, make sure that you have that as part of your process.
All right, so here is the recipe or the formula, outline, blueprint, whatever you want to call it, for a great ROF. So in fact, if you can, Sam, if you can just throw all of them up there, at least the green ones. So the first part, and this really just takes a few minutes. Number one, when they walk in, make sure you give them hope. So the first thing we say is, hey, Sam, welcome back to the office. Really happy you're here. The great news is we can help you with your problem. Let's get started. So the first thing we say is like, great to have you here. Good energy. We can help you. Let's talk about how we can help you. So if you walk in the room, you just splash some hope on them and you're like, what did I just walk into? Like, you ever walked into a room and you're like, okay, it's tense in here, or someone wants to say something, but they're not saying it. You know that feeling you get when you walk in your consultation or report of findings room? If that happens, stop. Don't continue. Address the tone in the room. So, for example, if you have a spouse, one time there was a wife needed help. The husband, we had like drag him to the ROF. He showed up, and he's like, you could tell he did not want to be there, and so he's sitting there in the corner of the room. His arms are crossed. He's slouched down in the chair. He won't look me in the eyes. I'm like, hey, I'm like, you seem like you don't want to be here. And he goes, I don't. I'm like, okay, well, the reason we wanted you to be here is we think we can help your wife, and we want to help your wife. And I imagine you want your wife to get help too, right? And he looks at me, he goes, oh God, he goes, if you can help my wife, I'll give you a hug. And he's like, I'm like, huh? I'm like, wait, what do you mean by that? He goes, my wife has been dealing with this issue for so long, and it's becoming a burden on her, and I'm concerned about her. I'm worried, and I just hope you can help. And all this guy wanted was someone just to like acknowledge that he was there and he was concerned. That was it. And he just all of a sudden, like a flip switch, and he was like a normal dude, and all of a sudden his tone went up and he was friendly. But he just needed, I think he was just one of those guys, he just wanted to be recognized for whatever reason, right? So if you have an awkward situation, in a really nice and polite way, just say, hey, you seem like you don't want to be here. You seem upset. Tell me what's going on. Let them vent for a minute. And you'll find in most situations that turns that tone and that mood around, and then you can proceed forward. If you have a situation like that and you don't address it, the entire report of findings is going to be awkward, and it usually doesn't end very well. The same thing is true if you walk in and like, great to see you, it's great to be here. Address it, address that as well. Let's say, hey, I'm pumped that you're here. I'm excited that we can help you. Let's talk about it. So you just want to acknowledge, be a human being, right? Don't feel like you have to gloss over emotion and the mood that's in the room. So third thing down, ask permission to review findings. So once you've done that, say, I'm excited to go over your recommendations. I feel we can help you. Is it okay with you what we found? So just ask them before. It's nice. It's polite to ask somebody if, they may have some questions. They may say, hey, before you get into that, I just have one question. Dr. Wells, how much is this going to cost today? Address. So sometimes patients will have, or spouses will have, an objection or a question. They just want to get off their chest. And before they do that, they're not going to listen to anything you say or anything you do. They just want to they have this burning question. Give them an opportunity to ask questions or voice any concern that they might have before going forward. Because if you don't have them in a state where they're ready to listen and participate, they're going to miss something, and you're not going to make a true connection. And then finally, so pre-frame what you're about to do. We talked a lot about pre-framing on the last training on day one. So just let them know, okay, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you, first of all, before we go over your recommendations, let me show you, first of all, what a healthy knee looks like. Then I'm going to show you what your knee looks like. And then I'm going to talk about what therapies we use. From there, we'll talk about what we can do to correct this problem. And then we'll talk about your insurance, what's covered, what's not covered, and we'll talk about any out-of-pocket costs that are involved. And then you can decide, so at the end, you can decide whether or not you want to be a patient here. Does that sound good? Yes. Okay, so you've just given them, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. Here's when we're going to do it. And are you ready to go? Yes. So that way they can, if they're expecting that you're going to talk about finances first, you've already told them you're going to do that last. So it really sets the stage for the information you're about to cover. Cool. All right, so this is when you're going to review your findings. So when we review findings, we always have, whether it's a bad spine or a bad knee or a bad lab test result. In fact, if you notice this on lab test results, if you ever get like a blood test back or a hormone panel back, whatever the lab finding is, have you ever noticed they always show you normal ranges and then they show you where you fit in that range? So if you're throwing up somebody's x-rays and you're saying, hey, this is bad and that's bad and this is good, well, what are you comparing that to? So we always have a normal, which is sort of like the control, and then we have where the patient is. And because you've gone through this education process beforehand, I always tell the patient, so here's your x-ray or here's your lab test. What do you see as good and what do you see as bad? And then pause and let the patient tell you what they think is good or bad. If they're right, say, yeah, you're absolutely right. If they're wrong, just say, you know what, I know how you could see that, but let me show you what's really going on here. So at this point, because of the education process, the patient should be telling you what's good and what's bad. If they're totally lost and like, you know what, or they're flustered, like, I really don't know, just tell me what's going on. Just tell them, right? You don't have to play games with that. But they should have a general sense with what's good or what's bad. All right, and then so confirm the patient understands the problem. And we do this by asking really good questions. I see a lot of docs dropping the ball with this, where they say, all right, let's look at the side of your neck. Now, normally you should have a curve in your neck. In your neck, you have a straight neck. So do you see how that's not normal, right? And then you skip to the next problem. Instead, you want to confirm that the patient understands the issue just by asking questions. So again, Sam, so this is an x-ray of your neck. Do you see what's wrong here? Yep, I do see what's wrong there. Well, what is wrong? It should be curved and it's straight. Absolutely. So do you see how that can cause neck pain? Yeah, that totally makes sense. So have you ever had an x-ray of your neck before? No, this is the first time. So do you see how, you've been to doctors, so many doctors over the years, no one took an x-ray of your neck, and here's the problem right here on a simple x-ray. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So the next question is, well, what happens if we leave your neck like this? I don't know. Well, do you think it'll maybe stay the same? Will it get worse? Will it correct itself? What do you think? It'll probably get worse over time, or maybe stay the same. Yeah, probably. So do you see how I'm asking questions and letting the patient respond? Usually the patient will come up with the right answer. And then finally the question is, okay, well, so here's the problem. This is what's causing your pain. Is this something that you want to correct? And then wait. So yeah, I do want to correct it. Okay, so let me show you how we're going to correct it. Okay, so I want to pause here, Sam. And so this is, thank you. So at this point, the patient should have a really good understanding of the problem because they've told you, right? You're not telling them, they're telling you what the problem is. And then also they've just told you that they want to get it corrected. So if they say, the question I get a lot from docs is like, what happens if they say, well, how are you going to correct it? Okay, let me show you how I'm going to correct this problem. But the important thing here is that the patient is verbalizing that they want help and they understand the problem. So the next bullet point here is review options. Now, we always give patients options, and there can be lots of options, right? So let's say, for example, they have a bad knee, they have osteoarthritis, they have a worn out knee. So don't skip over options that are really options. So oftentimes doctors will want to say, well, all right, we can do regenerative medicine. And in fact, at this point, that's the only option for you, Mr. Patient, regenerative medicine. Nothing else is going to fix this problem. We are your only hope and salvation. Patients know that that's total BS. And so when we're, like, for example, if we're presenting a plan for regenerative medicine, we tell them what the options are. So the options are, you can continue using pain medication. You can do another round of steroid injections if you haven't met your limit. You can do PT. And by the way, if they've already done those things, I would just tell them, like, you can continue to do those, but it seems like that hasn't really fixed it so far. The other option, which we'll talk about today, is regenerative medicine. And the final option is you can get surgery. Which one of those sounds like the best option for you? Which one do you want to do? And they'll sometimes they hem and haw, I've done cortisone, that doesn't work, and I really don't want to have surgery. So yeah, I think regenerative medicine is the best option. So
Can I ask you a question about that real quick? I
Yeah.
hope I didn't just spoil a flow here. Do you ever frame out the options? Do you ever frame them out in a kind of a simplistic way, like saying, so Andrew, I'm going to give you a couple options, and really these options fall within two buckets, if you want to say. One is more of an immediate or a short-term resolution to the symptom, to helping you with your pain or whatever you're doing. And then the other bucket is a resolution, a long-term, solution to what the actual underlying problem is. I'm going to give you those recommendations, and then you can ask any questions about those. Is that fair enough? So have you ever framed it out like that? Is that something that kind of, because the goal here is obviously to get them to bite on, not to bite, that's a bad way of saying it, to choose, without being sold, to choose the resolution. That's what these all these docs on the call, that's what they're there to do. They don't want to provide just symptom relief. They want to do the resolution. But I think sometimes people need to say, hey, well, if I do the steroid injection, yeah, I'm going to feel some symptom relief, but I'm really just I'm just kicking the can down the road. Have you ever done anything, or do you find utility in that type of pre-framing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. We frame all of that in the patient education process. So going back to, remember when I was telling stories, so this person had headaches and this person had sciatic pain, and these are the things they did already. They did cortisone injections, and they did pain medication, they did physical therapy. And so what we're doing is we're saying, all right, the patient's then saying, oh yeah, I did all those things too, and that didn't work. Or if they haven't done those things, they've already heard a bunch of patient stories now saying, well, those people did those things and it only provided either temporary relief, but it didn't really fix the problem, or they had bad side effects. And remember, so they're in your office because they probably have a slant toward what you're offering. And you can frame those things out in your story so that when you're offering those options, like, all right, here's, you can do pain medication. Well, shoot, didn't you just tell me that all those people tried that and that didn't work for them? Or maybe they've already done that so far. So you're framing that in your patient education process through stories. Okay. So when you get to that point, they've already checked that option off in their mind, for the most part. Does that answer your question, Sam?
Yeah, I love it. I think that's important. People, we don't give them an educated person is going to make better decisions than somebody who is not. And we should give, I think a lot of doctors or just business owners in general tend to think, well, they're not going to choose that. They're not going to choose my expensive care because it's too expensive. That's more of a self-reflecting issue and not necessarily the issue of the end user. If you really have a solution and those people have been educated, they will absolutely choose it at a high percentage, above 80%. So I'll go ahead and turn back over to you.
Yeah. And I used to do the opposite of that. I was more like all right, we are your only salvation. You need to pick this. And people saw through that. And what I found was the more transparent I was and the more honest I was of just laying out the options, they're like, wow, okay, this guy is being honest. I can trust this guy. And they just sense it. And they typically will choose what you're offering in more cases than not.
Yeah.
And then, so from this point, so you reviewed options. Okay. So they've, if they say, all right, I want to do what you have to offer. Let's see what you got, doc. This is where you review your recommendations. And we're going to cover this. We talked about doing multiple trainings on this topic. I'm not going to go too much into this because you can really dive into how to present recommendations. But for the purposes of time in this training, you're going to make your recommendations. And then the next bullet point is provide financial options. So you're going over insurance, out-of-pocket costs, and we're going to talk about that in a future training as well. So this is what I use for integrated patients, for insurance patients, for cash patients, neuropathy, whatever the program is. This is the exact formula we followed with a lot of success for years. So some common missteps. This is the second to last slide, doc. So I know we're going a little bit long. I hope this is beneficial for everybody. Here are some common things that I find that doctors are doing well, are not doing well. These are all mistakes I've made over the years. Number one, exaggerating the benefits of outcomes. If you have a patient that has a 30-degree scoliosis and you're telling them that you're going to correct their spine within a year and it's going to be perfectly straight, if you can do that, great, but chances are that's probably not going to happen. If you have a regenerative medicine patient and they're a phase 3 degenerated knee, almost bone on bone, and you're telling them that this amazing stem cell therapy is going to give them all the cartilage back in their knee, that's unrealistic. People are going to see through that. So be honest. If you think that you can help the patient by 50% or get them better in a week, a month, a year, tell them that. Tell them what your honest opinion is. Another mistake I find doctors doing is they're not really listening to what's happening with patients. They're not listening to verbal cues. They're not listening to nonverbal or physical cues, like we were talking about, like awkwardness in the report of findings. Make sure that when you go in with your agenda, your report of findings agenda, make sure that you're less focused on what you're saying and more focused on how the patient is responding to what you're saying. Make sure they're tracking you. Yes, you have an agenda, but the patient has an agenda too. So you need to, again, meet the patient where they are. Make sure that you're paying attention to all the cues that you need to be paying attention to and have an honest, real conversation with your patients.
Yeah. And I'll put a more, I heard one time, I'll put a very visual, like a finer point maybe on this point, if you wouldn't mind. The person who sells speaks 70% of the time and listens 30% of the time. The person who gives advice listens 70% of the time and speaks 70% of the time and speaks 30% of the time, right? What would you rather do? Would you rather sell? Would you rather give advice? And I think that is that's a mindset. If you're actually listening to the patient and getting their feedback, they're going to sell themselves just by the fact. I don't even say sell themselves. They're going to convince themselves that you have a solution, and that since what people think when you A, listen to their problem, B, deconstruct their problem, and meaning you describe their own problem back to them. Do you know what they think? They think, and rightly so, they think you must have the answer. If you understand this problem that well, that you can even answer or ask follow-up questions to like that precise and with that level of detail, they're like, subconsciously they think, well, he or she has, they know this problem. They have the answer. So this, I hate, sometimes I just feel like certain things really go like they not really listening to the patient. This could be a point that could go under the radar. And I just wanted to really emphasize and add color to this point, because I think you're right on point.
And I was so dumb about this, Sam. When I was first in practice, like young, naive, not self-aware, I was so dumb. And the fact that I would have this script, I'm like, all right, I just need to ram the script down the patient's throat and like just totally ignore any of the patient's feedback. And it was like, it was so just an awkward and just an ineffective way to approach it. And when, I'm a huge fan of scripting for the sole purpose of, if you know the script so well, then you can not worry about what you have to say, and then you can start listening. And when you start listening, then you really have effective communication, just like you mentioned. And that's when doctors really make a big shift in their patient communication and conversions, when they understand that.
Yeah. And I think the idea of scripting gives people the wrong idea. I think they think, oh, well, you just read off of a script and it's a big long page and you start at the top and you end at the bottom. Right. And
yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah. That is not what a script is. All right. A script is preparing yourself with the proper language and communication skills so you can help that person down the road. So you can actually help them become educated, knowing what to say, when not to say, how to respond, to really help that person help themselves.
Yep. Yeah. Using this kind of using hyperbole, going to the first bullet point here is, you don't use like, we're like, this is the greatest, whatever, like this is the best thing since. You just use like, don't over exaggerate what you're saying. Just use regular plain old English and people will understand you. Don't use complicated language. We talked about that before. Keep it at a 3rd grade, 6th grade level. Docs not asking good questions. So oftentimes, docs will make a point and they don't either, they just move on to the next topic that they want to discuss without actually making sure that the patient is understanding and they agree with what you're telling them. So make sure that you're asking good questions. This is one that really affects a lot of docs. This was me, especially the first couple of years in practice, is just not being you. So when I find that doctors aren't prepared, meaning they don't know what to say, they're not scripted, they're nervous, they haven't practiced handling objections and questions, and it's really tough to be you. And so, if you're relaxed and you're who you normally are, you come off as a lot more authentic. And again, that kind of ties into not being prepared. So you only get a handful of finite amount of objections and questions that you get. So I would practice in the mirror, practice scripted responses to questions and objections. So that way, when someone asks me like, hey, doctor, I got this a couple times, like, do you think chiropractors are real doctors? Early on in practice, that would piss me off and I'd get all flustered. And then I'd be like, yeah, of course we're real doctors. We do this, and this. And so I'm like, that was a really poor response. So I started like practicing how I would respond to that question. And then when someone asked me that again, it was like, I was very calm and relaxed, and I'm like, yeah, I think we're real doctors. Like, no, okay, great. And that was it. That handled it.
In the mirror, were you doing jumping jacks while you were practicing that?
Of course I was. Yeah, always.
Good.
And then being inflexible. Sometimes when patients question your recommendation or question how you do things, sometimes we get a little bit combative. And so if patients have questions and objections, that's great. They should be asking questions and objections. And when they're asking questions and objections, that means they're closer to coming to a decision, to coming on board or buying something from you. So if you're getting questions, just make sure, or they're questioning what you're offering, or your modality or your approach, make sure that you're not so rigid. I used to be very like, all pro chiropractic and bad conventional medicine. And I found when I softened my lines a little bit on that, like people were more responsive to me as just a more well-rounded, educated, confident doctor. And then finally, just letting your ego get in the way. The best way I found to do this was just be scripted. Practice. So I would find my ego would get in the way if people used to challenge me or ask tough questions. I always took that personally. But when I really practiced on my patient communication, I found out that the ego right away just kind of went away, and I was able to be myself. I was prepared for every patient situation. And I think, was that the last one, Sam? I think that was. Yes. Okay. So that is, that was a lot that we went over today. I almost feel like maybe I should have even done that in 2 sessions.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be a mouthful, but you don't know until you start sharing. So I think even the next training is going to be really awesome. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I really hope that you learned something from this training, and maybe you took a couple valuable nuggets away. And I would really encourage you, like if you found some things on here that like, wow, I really need help with this. Here's what I want you to do is go back and maybe rewatch the day one training video, or maybe rewatch how to schedule and handle a new patient. Because really, while the day 2 visit is really important, my message here, and I hope that you got this, is that I really want you to focus on your initial intake process and your day 1 process. If you get that part right, this day 2 stuff is going to be a whole lot easier and a whole lot less salesy if you can get day 1 right. But it's important that we talk about these concepts and the philosophies and human behavior in day 2, because it matters. So in the next training, we're going to break down in a little bit more detail on how we actually present recommendations and financials and how to handle objections in a really clear way that's going to come off as polished to the patient and will not feel awkward for you or for your staff when they're doing report of findings. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today.
Well, I think it's going to be awesome. I mean, I have, again, I used to train on this. I know you and I have had several discussions about this. I mean, even scripting, I think next week we'll be able to dive, because again, we did today, we really went over like an overview and the concepts, but there's a couple of things that you can do scripting wise and just education wise on day 2 that really do make make the difference. In fact, I remember when I was learning how to, or teaching, learning and then teaching how to present financials. Man, you can do it so wrong, or you can do it so right. And, silence is your friend. Knowing how to, knowing how to handle objections, knowing what's what. So I think next week is going to be very, I do think we had a lot of tactics on this one, but I think next week will be extremely tactical. I've got a couple things I know I want to throw in there from my days of training, and we've talked, and I know you've got a lot of really great things as well. So next week is going to be awesome. I would say, I know we're over on time. Is there any questions? Actually, two things. Any questions, go ahead and use the chat. Also, I did put in a URL, a domain, mypatientstream.com/school. And that has every video that Dr. Wells and I have done from his first training until this one today, which will be up later today. That has all of those recordings and then a little write-up on what each one is. So if you want to go back and review any of those steps, mypatientstream.com/school is where I would encourage you to go. But any questions from any of the folks? I know we had some people drop off right at the hour. I know we went over a little bit, but any questions, any things you guys want to say before we part here today? I don't know that we have anybody brave enough. Okay, guys, thank you so much for coming. And Dr. Wells, you're the best, buddy. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun, and I hope this was valuable to you guys. And thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Heather. I know you guys have been on here before, and I appreciate you guys being on here. And I hope this was valuable, and I hope you can help more patients in your practice.
Awesome. Cool. Well, assuming I can figure out how to stop this, I will. But thanks, everybody, for coming, and we'll see you on the next one.